about 10, so we can probably kick off. We have a nice intimate crew today, so I would definitely encourage you, please stop us in the middle of our conversation. If we say something that you want to dive into, let's keep this really open dialogue as well as organic, so that we can have as great of a conversation as we possibly can. So I'm going to introduce myself, and then I'm going to let my panelists, fellow co-panelists introduce themselves when they're kind of diving into what they're seeing within their respective worlds. And today's panel is about other operational technologies, the OT, supply chain intrusion, and how to safeguard that when we're talking about national security as well as critical infrastructure. So my name is Catherine Wang. I go by Cat because nobody's got time for 4 syllables. I am the CEO of a company called Control-Alt-Delete. So we live in the strategic intersection between cyber and physical research and technology in support of national security. Prior to this, I started a 16-year career at Google, laying the foundation for what you all know to be as large language modeling, natural language processing, generative AI today. And then I spent the last 6 years kind of in the cybersecurity threat intelligence space in support of DoD and national security. So let me start with taking a look at the overall threat landscape. So last I checked. Sure, we can do that. Yeah, sure.
That way, then I know you've got about 10 minutes.
Sure, please.
So actually, Jimmy, what you go next?
Oh, sure. Let's get up on the other side of the that's really nice. Podium, they can see me. So I'm Jimmy Collins. I'm here with the Hawaii Office of Homeland Security. Many of you are familiar with the federal department. We mirror that in some ways at the state level. My position at the office is Chief of Planning and Operations, and I have 3 prime focuses that are going to be of most interest to you. One is cybersecurity across the state, also critical infrastructure security, and then one topic that we'll probably be touching on quite a bit, and that's related to the national security, and that's threats within our region, primarily nation-state threats, aka China.
So why it works out so well. So Lucia Niemeyer, I used to work with states and communities all around the country. So my background is national security. I'm an Air Force vet, 11 years on the Senate Armed Services Committee. More recently, I was the Assistant Secretary of Defense for all installations, energy and environmental programs for the Department of Defense globally. So I had the chance to work with states all around the country as well as overseas on addressing the OT risk. And specifically, I was asked by the Secretary of Defense, Jim Mattis, back in 2017, start paying attention to the OT on our bases, in our interceptor sites, our radar sites, and we need to come up with a plan to defend the homeland. So those of you may know, the National Security Strategy says the homeland is no longer a sanctuary. We are going to be hit with cyber attacks. It's happening. So that has been my job when I was in the Pentagon, to look at that OT risk, which Kat will talk about here in a minute. But more importantly, is to come up with a plan and ultimately how do we mitigate risk, first from DoD and now in private sector. I took that work when I was in DoD. I ended up at the White House for the last 8 months of previous administration. And now I'm running a nonprofit called Building Cybersecurity, which takes the DoD work we did on creating frameworks and now offers it to all of society, water systems, buildings, things like that. So I run a nonprofit. Kat and I have been talking about this for various conferences on the OT risk. So we're here to raise awareness. They'll talk specifically about risk to critical infrastructure with the help of Jimmy, but more importantly, to give you some recommendations on what we think we need to do collectively moving forward to mitigate that risk. All right, go Kat.
Excellent, thank you for that. Okay, so let's start with the threat landscape. So first of all, I should say I am a civilian, and based off of what I can keep count on, there's about 4 continents right now that are experiencing geopolitical tensions. So our tensions have never been more divided. And that on top of mounting cybersecurity attacks, there's a lot to be concerned about when it comes to the threat landscape. So I would say if we're thinking about like assessing the overall cyber threats, the axis of evil will stop at nothing to destabilize our position as a global superpower. So that's really what is at stake today. Here's the bottom line up front. China has leveraged its position as a global manufacturing superpower over the past decade to strategically infiltrate our DoD secure military facilities with trojanized, compromised, or counterfeit devices. Now I'm about to walk you through a research that I've done over the past year to show you what we found, why it presents a severe risk for national security, and lay the foundation for a wider aperture on how this affects our homes. The fact that these compromised or counterfeit devices exist on a broader scale across the United States and other parts of the world, and how that overlays into the critical infrastructure piece of it too. All right, so let me tell you a story. About 12 months ago, a good friend of mine who's a researcher that does research at the university on behalf of the United States Air Force just had a hunch. He was noticing some interesting traffic coming out of their DoD ASN and wanted me to take a look at our net flow data. So he gave me a spotlight ASN and he said, "God, just take a look at what you find. I hope to God it's nothing." Within an hour's worth of a look back window, I found 30,000 rows. Now, exactly what did I find? What we looked at was net flow data that's coming out of that DoD ASN that shows evidence of malicious activity, right? Human interactions are going to follow a certain behavioral pattern. Weaponized automation, aka botnets and other forms of malicious activity, are going to exhibit quite another form of behavioral patterns. So that's specifically what I was looking at. And then we rate that on a low to high scale of risk. I found 30,000 rows. After that, I did one of three things as an analyst. I cut the data. I looked at it by geography, I looked at it by time, and I looked at it by device. Very interesting things once you cut the data up. Let's start with geography. The first thing I noticed is the closer the DoD facilities are to China, the higher the volume of naughty traffic, right? So I found the highest one actually located out of Kaneohe Bay here in Oahu. I'll get to that in a second. The rest of them, though, were very strategic locations throughout the United States. The people in this room probably understand a little bit more about the value of certain locations over others. I'm just going to leave that there for that to percolate. The other thing, when I look at time, is that this traffic seemed to be seasonal. So when I looked at the traffic and overlaid it with certain geopolitical events, let's say Xi Jinping's visit to San Francisco with President Biden back in November of 2023, you see a huge spike in net flow traffic coming out of these ASN. You can probably extrapolate what they're trying to do there with that correlation. Normal traffic coming out would not have this type of seasonality associated with certain political events. Now, let's look at device. Everybody is probably very aware of the need to secure our desktop our devices as well as our mobile app and mobile web. So when you plot a lot of the traffic that I saw for weaponized or high-risk activity based off of device, the lowest lines were actually those two devices, mobile web SDK, as well as desktop. However, when we're talking about OT, the ones that had the huge EKG type of performance or data were connected TV devices or smart TV devices. These are our display monitors that are mounted to the wall in cafeterias, in conference rooms, in offices, possibly in our homes, in military domiciles within the bases. Now, those in general may not be too scary for you, but when you layer on the potential of remote access and AI, let's say in a very public cafeteria setting, there is a scenario where you can re-enable the microphone, if there is one on the CTV device, layer on AI to determine what the vocal and possibly facial recognition are, get the entire transcript, and then possibly exfiltrate that data out. That's what we were seeing in the NetFlow data. These large packages of data that were connecting to the internet and getting shipped out when they were turned on or booted back on. So the other thing that I did was break it out by device type, CTV device type, manufacturers, right? Can we glean any other information from these types of OT devices to better understand where the intrusion is coming from? So what I discovered is that they're not off brands, right? The United States government doesn't buy random brands from China or overseas. They buy Samsungs, they buy Rokus, they buy Sonys. There are very specific types, makes, and models where we found had a higher correlation with this type of intrusion activity. So we went out and we found these devices and we brought them into our labs. We took them apart and guess what? They were trojanized. A lot of them were preloaded with a particular form of malware called triada. So if anybody isn't familiar with it, just know it's bad, it's nasty. And you cannot turn it off without rendering the entire device useless. And if you do turn it on, it can turn it off, it can turn itself back on again. So if you think that the OT devices can be secure by just simply turning off the ability to connect to Wi-Fi, unfortunately, we'd be wrong. If you think that it's secure over Wi-Fi that's been locked up, unfortunately, we'd be wrong again. There are PhD students at research institutes that can create a cantenna out of a spaghetti can and an old satellite dish, that can intercept Wi-Fi up to 23 miles away, right? So these OT devices pose a significant threat. Then the final thing that I did is determine whether or not any of these compromised devices were actually embedded in any of these facilities. So Kaneohe Bay was one that had a particularly high volume of traffic, right? So I went in to usaspending.gov, I searched for the makes and models of the TVs that were impacted, and guess what? They were purchased at suspiciously low prices and installed in these facilities, sold to the United States Navy and installed in these facilities as of June 2022. So it gets a little bit worse than that. We ended up sharing a lot of this data with other DoD entities, and they were able, the United States Air Force was actually able to find an installation of one of these devices in their facility, right? So the next step is working with them on a teardown process, possibly counter espionage, whatever they want. But if we think about recent events like the intelligence leak with the Israeli and Iranian attack, I would venture to guess there's probably a small handful of people who even knew about that. While we're running around and worried about insider threat or zero trust, I wonder whether or not we were just pointing fingers at each other or worried about those types of threats when in reality, the enemy is already on the line and they're exfiltrating data in other ways. Okay, so I've thrown a lot at you. The final thing I want to say is I am a researcher by heart. I am naturally critical of data in general, right? There's lies, there are damn lies, and then there's statistics. So the first thing that I did is I went to my friends at DISA and I said, hey, can you just make sure that I'm not full of it? I'm not imagining this. This isn't, you know, in my head somehow. I'm not a spook. So they came back and they reviewed it, and not only did they determine, yeah, it is definitely traffic that they're observing. It is deconflicted, meaning it is not from the NSA, it is not from us. And more scarily, it is bidirectional, meaning it is not only receiving instructions, but it is phoning home through innocuous forms of traffic that on OT devices that are not secure. So if you were going to take one thing away from this research, I have no other agenda other than trying to provide the clear and present danger of a potential black swan event. There are certain organizations within the DoD leadership that are taking this seriously, and others that are not. So if anybody oversees this within your world and you want to talk a little bit more about the research that I've done, I will share everything I have with you. I will put you in touch with the DISA folks, whatever it takes to keep American life safe and our national security, uphold national security. I think you can probably extrapolate the bigger problem here. If these devices are already in military facilities, it's probably exponentially worse when it comes to being in our own homes and in critical infrastructure. So we're going to start with that very narrow aperture and grow it. I'm going to hand it over to Lucian, and he'll share a little bit more on his thoughts.
All right, so the first thing you need to do is you need to go ahead and LinkedIn with Cataway, all right? And you'll notice when you LinkedIn with her, and everybody should, she says she's a mad scientist, all right? It is always awful to follow a mad scientist, but it's hard being able to talk. I'm gonna try, all right? But I definitely, we wanted to start off with an actual case study of where we're seeing threats in OT. Trust me, the world is gonna be more threatened by OT than IT. When I go around the country and talking about where we have the range of threats, I always like to put up a meme. And I always put up Barbie versus Oppenheimer. One's IT, the other one's OT, all right? We have to pay attention to the OT threat. All right, we're in Hawaii right now. What's the biggest facing threat right now? China. And what's the scenario that we've been talking about here at EPIA? It's gonna be Taiwan, right? Who here in this room thinks that China is ultimately gonna take Taiwan through kinetic activity? All right. Who here thinks it's going to be a cyber attack? Yeah. Who here thinks that Volt Typhoon was just a precursor testing about what can be embedded in Guam? Who thinks Volt Typhoon is also in the systems in Hawaii? Yep. All right. I'm thoroughly convinced we can spend all the time. Amal Paparo is going to talk tomorrow about all these kinetic opportunities and what's going on right now with blockades. We're going to have a virtual blockade of Taiwan, initiated by cyber attacks of the power and water systems, and Taiwan's going to capitulate in 2 weeks without a shot fired. That's what we're facing right now as a world. When it comes to the connected IT and OT convergence, who here actually believes in firewalls and air gaps between IT and OT? Thank you. That is 20-year-old thinking. All you have to do is study Stuxnet and see how many firewalls and air gaps that attack will be able to overcome. I like to draw down the lights, and I like to bring it back up. Every time I start talking, the Chinese are actually trying to shut me down. So we're just going to have to power through that right now, because I do think there's some things that I want to get across, right? Volt Typhoon and what is now the Typhoon series is the way we are going to be coerced in the future, all right? Has anybody here heard of Muleshoe, Texas? Does that little town matter to anybody in this room? All right. You know what happened to Muleshoe?
Muleshoe?
Fire it away. Muleshoe.
Muleshoe.
Go ahead.
I was just giving you a correction on the pronunciation.
All right. But tell me what happened.
Oh, I went to school in West Texas, so I know about Muleshoe.
Okay. Does anybody know what happened in Muleshoe, Texas, about 6 months ago? All right. Russians attacking a water system. Is that familiar to anybody? They actually attacked the water system and it caused the water in the tower to overrun, and it was attributed to a Russian attack. Is anybody else tracking Aliquippa, Pennsylvania? Iranians messing around with the water systems there?
Last year there was also a similar attack, which was probably a precursor that happened to Tucson, Florida.
Right, Oldmar, Florida. Now the FBI will say Oldmar, Florida was an insider attack. I'm not so sure that's the story. All right. What I'm getting at is this is no longer theory. Volt Typhoon. Okay, that's a Chinese malware that was embedded with the potential to cause sabotage. But we are already under attack. This country, the United States, is already under attack by our adversaries. It could be North Korea, it could be Iran, it could be Russia, China, they're all aligned right now. But they are probing and they are actually manipulating OT in our critical infrastructure with the intent to send a signal to us. Is anybody really talking about that? That is an entire conference where Guam, Hawaii, Taiwan are on the front line of what we need to deal with when it comes to a cyber threat. That's kind of what I focused on when I was in the Pentagon, Homeland's no longer sanctuary. What do we need to do to prepare and ultimately defend ourselves against attacks to our national infrastructure? All right, was anybody tracking the headlines of Volt Typhoon? There were some congressional hearings on this last day, and as Cybercom Director, NSA Director, General Nakasone went up to Congress and talked to a committee, along with Jen Easterly of CISA, along with Chris Ray of the FBI. Did anybody track, everybody in this room who cares about OT needs to go back and take a look at that room, all right? Chris Ray, FBI Director, talked about a direct threat to public safety. All right? Jen Easterly talked about mass chaos of all our essential activities either being threatened or the fear that they're being attacked. Right? General Nakasone said, thank God for Microsoft, that they found this malware. It had been in our systems for up to a year, before Microsoft discovered it and released it. Is anybody in this room a little concerned that Microsoft is having to be our first offender when it comes to our critical infrastructure? I mean, we're laughing, but I find it tragic. I find our current cyber policy in this country a complete disgrace because we're getting attacked significantly. Is anybody tracking salt? It's so egregious that the current administration won't release details on it because it's attacked our telecom systems. All right, and extracting data and also extracting very sensitive data. So we have to be serious about what we face as a country and ultimately what the repercussions are. We're no longer talking about risk to military activities. We're talking coercion against the citizens of the United States. How much money do you think we spend as a nation on cybersecurity for that critical infrastructure? $200 million a year over 4 years coming out of CISA, available to all 50 states. $200 million a year to be spread among 50 states. Think about that. How much are we spending on missile defense as a country? And we've spent over the last, as a former Senate staffer, now in the building, we've spent over $400 billion over the last 8 or 9 years to get to maybe a 25% probability out a missile headed to the United States. Think about how much we're spending there and then how vulnerable our water systems are. Is there a water system in the country today that can stand up to a Russian or a Chinese malware attack? I'd say no. I'd say no because of the fact that it's happening. We were caught flat-footed on Volt Typhoon. We're definitely caught flat-footed on Salt Typhoon. Our adversaries are getting into our OT. Does anybody remember the Colonial Pipeline attack that took down gas on the East Coast? All right. Has anybody actually studied that? That was probably a bad day for DarkSide, which was the ransomware attacker who actually took down the pipeline, as it was for our nation. The last thing that those business people wanted to do was to shut down gas on the East Coast. They wouldn't wait for that when they really need to. All they wanted was a $4.5 million ransom. What they didn't anticipate is that when they took over the billing system of Colonial Pipeline on that Friday morning, that billing system was connected to smart meters and smart valves that was actually running the pipeline. So that CEO had to make a decision to shut down gas for the entire East Coast for 2 reasons. Does anybody know what the first one was? They were moving fuel for free and they couldn't bill it. They didn't even know where their fuel was going. So they're hemorrhaging cash. The second reason is they had no idea how long the bad actor had been in their systems, and they did not know whether that ransomware attack or that attack vectors had gone into the OT and could have potentially created a catastrophic environmental situation. Right? We have to pay attention to the threats that CAT's recognizing about supply chain risk, about devices being used as a vector of attack, but also a method of attack. Please take away 2 things. OT can be used as a source of attack, as well as the result in the committed impact. Does anybody here remember Target department store attack? $2 billion of damage caused, that went all through the IT systems, all into the customer records billing system. Does anybody know how it started? HVAC system, a USB put in to service one, or not diagnose one HVAC system in one store. And yet we're still trying to figure out how to manage OT. The reason why there's a sense of frustration in my voice, I've talked to Cybercom relentlessly. They are not paying attention to the OT. There's somebody buried in the bowel of 3.6 at Cybercom, but we are so focused on data security that we're missing what's actually going to kill us, all right, or cause property damage, or coerce us not to take action. So that is really what we want to talk about, is what can be done to get after the OT threat, all right, and actually work with providers, because guess what? No power, no water, no war, no data. Everything we're talking about in every other session in this conference starts with 2 things: power and data, power and water. All right. So if our adversaries attack our power systems, we got nothing. We have no technology. We got nothing. We have to pay attention to that. I'm part of a study right now we're doing in Department of Defense, where we're looking at real-time situational awareness for fuel in the theater. I can't tell you how many times when I was in the Pentagon, I asked during war games, hey, we have to put a fuel input. We have to assume our adversary is going to pick up on our Achilles heel, and they're going to drive every tanker to the bottom of the ocean. They're going to bomb every defense fuel point. Red Hill was probably the biggest disaster we ever had. That was our only strategic reserve in the Pacific theater. So fuel is going to be the issue that our adversaries go after. But guess what? No fuel, no electricity, no battlefield capability, technologies, and we're done. All right? So we have to ask ourselves in that OT realm, what can we do? The study we're working on is getting real-time situational awareness, and I can talk to anybody here in the room who wants to talk about it, on how can our command structure in the Pacific theater, dispersed around the theater, find out, okay, is that fuel accessible? Can we get to it? Is it operating? Or is it down because of a cyber attack or some other type of kinetic attack? These are the types of things we need to be asking ourselves. It's all about OT cyber, where an adversary can take down physical systems, and ultimately, what do we need to protect them or to respond to them? All right, I'll stop there. We have a lot to get to. I want to make sure Jimmy's got a chance, and then we'll get to questions and follow-on conversation. I just want to give you some things to think about. Any questions for me personally before I turn it over to Jimmy? All right, all you.
I like comedians. So, where do we even go from there? Lots of doom and gloom, right? There's a lot of challenges in the cybersecurity landscape. They come to a point right here on this island. We house home all of the service component headquarters for INDOPACOM, along with INDOPACOM. We have an array of installations that are across our state. And the mission that they perform is really critical, right? It's not just them, though. We live in a state where a lot of people live, and the adversary can hold our economy to great extent hostage. And to what extent? To impact our national security, to prevent or to at least influence the operations of our military here. Add on top of that, our critical infrastructure, almost all of which the military here at least depends on. They get their power from the critical infrastructure entities that are resident here, private sector. They get their water, they get their wastewater, they get everything they need to be a survivable kind of installation and to project their power forward. Those installations and these islands also are power projection for the rest of the forces that would come through here to get to a fight, for example, should there be some kind of a kinetic operation that's in this region. On top of that, our critical infrastructure, and it's not just in this state, but it's across the United States. It's aged, it's brittle, and here we've got the unique opportunity of dealing with single points of failure. One power provider for this island, one power provider for each of our islands. Very small municipal providers of water and wastewater, most of which haven't had the kind of infrastructure investment that any of our infrastructure has had across the nation. So we start at a disadvantage, that's for sure. What I will say though is we also start with an inherent advantage of where we are at. We are all about creating relationships, building partnerships, and collaborating towards shared concerns, to confronting shared threats, and to helping each other do what we all know needs to be done to make that happen. Lucian mentioned how much money goes or doesn't go to cybersecurity for critical infrastructure. He mentioned the $200 million per year for 4 years. That's a grant program that the federal government established to help not critical infrastructure, but to help states develop or improve their cybersecurity footprint. And I'll go back to the not the critical infrastructure part in a minute. But for Hawaii, that amounts to a total of roughly $3 million for 4 years, $3 million each year on average for 4 years, and that ends in fiscal year 2025. That's it. That's for all the power, all the water, all the telecommunications, all these hyper important, incredibly critical, not just for us to be here and having a conversation today, but for the military to project power and to protect our national security and our national interests. It's nothing when it comes to the threats that we're facing. Volt Typhoon has been here, is here, I will say. And that's not the only threat, it's just the latest, right? And we know that it's intentional. We know that this isn't a criminal actor. We know why they're here. They're here because the military's here. They're here because we are a power projection. We are a national projection of the United States here in Hawaii. Very disconcerting. And also cause for us to put great priority in, as I mentioned, my 3 focus areas: critical infrastructure protection and security, cybersecurity across the state, and the nation-state threats that we're facing right now. And we're being incredibly active. With the resources we have, we are doing yeoman's work, as they say. We have connected and maintained strong relationships across our DoD community, not just at a combatant command level, but all of the service components and the installations. I have them on speed dial, and we talk every week. We are engaged across our critical infrastructure community, across all of the sectors that are here in Hawaii. We look for opportunities to connect those with resources that are available, but it's not going to be enough. And we feel the pressure to do more, do it now, do it faster, and make sure we've got the strongest partnerships possible. And that includes partnerships all the way back to DC. That's talking to OSD about defense critical infrastructure protection. That's understanding what they prize the most so we can help them protect it. But it's also about helping them understand we're not just protecting it because we want them to win the war. Obviously, we do. We also have people who live here every day, and their livelihoods depend on our ability to get them power, and their health depends on our ability to get them water and wastewater. So it is a marriage of convenience in some ways, but it's also how we operate here. We know that they're our neighbors. We know that the national security mission is so important, and we live it every day. There isn't a day that goes by that we're not talking about how do we do this better. But it does take resources, and we are struggling there. We do have a couple of kind of cutting edge, if you will, approaches that we think are going to help us move faster in the short term. And that's actually developing a strong partnership that allows us to do a collective strategy for Homeland Security here in the state. Right now, there's an RFP on the street to help us develop a strategy collectively with our military partners, with our critical infrastructure partners, and with our Homeland Security stakeholder organizations, so we can understand what we need to be doing to get ready for the things that are being told that are going to be coming. When you listen to the rhetoric coming out of China and the plans that they're making for the years not too long distance away from us, we feel the heat, and we are looking at ways that we can collaborate even more. And that means actually doing collaborative war planning, if you will, so that we understand what the military is going to need and what we're going to be called on to take care of ourselves. And that includes being able to give them the critical services and utilities that they're going to need to make all of that happen. So I don't want to take up a lot of time just pontificating and talking at you, but I do want to encourage questions, conversation. It's a nice small group, and this is a really important topic, so I want to open it up for anyone who has questions for any of us or all of us.
No, so okay, I got a question for the audience. Who here had on your bingo card, killing terrorists with beavers and walkie-talkies? At the beginning of the year. The reason why I bring that up is what Kat talked about as far as the connected devices is absolutely real. That's an actual case study. And our adversaries are a lot more creative than we give them credit for. I guarantee you, in every command center here in Hawaii, in every command center around our U.S. military, nobody is really paying attention to the Sony and Samsung TVs that are in command posts that are showing sensitive information or classified information. This is the type of creativity that each one of us in our room needs to start asking. Where do we have a threat? Does anybody here remember what happened with Sands Casino? Has anybody heard of the infamous thermometer attack? Where a bad actor was able to find an unprotected IP address in a thermometer in a fish tank that controls the heat for that fish tank. He was able to work their way back up and do an entire IT system attack against Sands. Does anybody remember, been hearing what's going on with MGM Grand versus Caesars? Caesars paid the ransom. There's been now case studies of what should have been done. MGM paid about a $15 to $20 million ransom. MGM decided to do the right thing and not pay the ransom. How much are they in the hole for now? 300 million was their last filing as far as damages from that attack.
So
We have to look at and that migrated to the OT, so that we need to ask ourselves, where are we protecting potential vectors of attack, as well as protecting OT from being the source or the method for which they attack us. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm going to throw out a joke. I feel like sometimes I wish I was a better cyber criminal. I'd have a lot more money. But I want to touch on something that Jimmy's saying, and Lucian to some extent, where we're really bringing it down to the human level. So let's go think about the art of the possible. Okay, I was at DEF CON. I watched a hacker hack into an insulin pump. You wanted to guess how long it took her to do that? Let's just have some fun. Throw out some numbers.
1 minute.
Well, that would be fast. 8 minutes. So imagine a world, especially all the veterans in a room who may have had any kind of devices embedded in their body as a part of their service or coming out of the service. Imagine a scenario where cyber adversaries can take millions of lives hostage without kidnapping a single person. Right? That's the level that we're talking about. I've also watched hackers turn an oven into a bomb. Imagine that level, but for Colonial Pipeline. You very strategically said it as an environmental disaster. We could go in the opposite direction, think of it as a horrible attack to our nation's security and our civilians in the country. Right? So while we are talking about operational technology, its impact, like the bigger scope really is the need for more secure practices, more governance, more requirements from the manufacturers to lock this up. Cyber needs to be a foundational component if we're going to continue living in this digital transformational world. Also, don't put a TV in your bedroom. Thanks.
All right, so I think we've scared the crap out of people. Is that what I'm seeing in the audience? Yes. There's no questions? Because we do want to offer some recommendations how to mitigate risk. Go ahead.
My question is.
Do you mind, I think this might be recorded, if you could just go to the microphone.
Sorry about that.
My question is, there's been a lot of talk in the last 10 plus years about the usefulness of the cyber domains, particularly in the realm of war and war fighting. And so I'm kind of confused on how there's been so much talk about data, and there's always been it's always been a thought experiment about the physical aspect. And then with what you guys are talking about, and also with how StudNet was such a clear example of the possibilities, how has OT now fallen through the cracks for so many years now, when this is the one thing that generals have always wanted, and now we're not doing it, and our adversaries are doing it?
Well, I've got a world of responses to that. I could take hours. Okay, I'm going to be really skeptical because of the fact that I think that's really more realistic for you to answer that question. Coming up with a cyber defense, it doesn't cost billions of dollars. Defense industrial base, remember I came out of the Senate for 11 years. I worked for the Senate Armed Services Committee. Defense contractors would rather us buy an F-35 than come up with a cyber defense. So what you have here is you have a lot of war games when you start talking cyber. It doesn't necessarily need a lot of money or a lot of big weapon systems or any kind of protective measures to be able to effectively defend against it. So I think there's just been a fixation on the data side because we have been exploited as a free society by data and vulnerabilities. And meanwhile, we're adding millions of vectors of connected OT every day. It just is not a lot of, there's not a lot of money in it. Try to tell a water authority, that they need to spend money in OT. They don't have the money for it, protections. So I think does need to be, and there's a reason why we're on this panel, is to raise awareness on the OT threat, and to say to the Department of Defense, and trust me, I may have an opportunity to go back into DoD, where I'm definitely going to be focused on this, that we need to spend a lot more money on the protection of our citizens from a cyber threat than we are right now. So I don't have a clear answer on, why we should have been looking at this 10 years ago. I think there has been a lot of advancements on the automation and convergence of IT and OT. Like we mentioned earlier, firewalls and air gaps were acceptable 10 years ago, they're not now. So we do need to see an update of the thought process. Going to military operations, I still don't believe that, and I've been talking to a lot of folks in cybercom, that they understand that you can have a very tangible physical impact from a cyber attack. And so they're too busy protecting donor networks and conducting operations overseas. I'm not sure we're where we need to be on defensive cyber for our own critical infrastructure. So I don't have a clear answer for you other than the fact that you're right. We haven't been paying attention and it has fallen through the cracks.
Answer that a little bit. Thinking about it from a critical infrastructure perspective, I think part of it has been this notion that you didn't need to control the cybersecurity world. Build it and they will come, but they will come to use the games and not necessarily the secureness of it. It's taken us this long just to get to a notion of secure by design, and thank God we're there. But think of all of the things that are already out in our world that weren't secure by design, including all the controls for OT for things like power plants and water purification and desalinization and all of those things that we come to expect to work, but they were in an age, they were built in an age and installed in an age when secure by design wasn't even a thought process. I mean, we're already in a conversation about AI and how do you secure it, and folks are saying just let them build it. I'm afraid we keep missing the same boat, and it keeps passing us, and we don't take the opportunity to think about this in a way that a security-minded individual might, rather than an IT developer, an OT developer. And I think we do that to our detriment, and we leave a lot of doors open that criminals, as well as nation-state actors who are there, who are out to do us harm as a nation, are going to walk through. They're walking through them every day. And now we've got those not secure by design systems that are legacy. And they were installed at a time when it takes you 20, 30, maybe 40 years for those systems to come obsolete. And they took millions of dollars to put in to begin with. So imagine the bill waiting at the end of that if you want to replace it with secure by design, or if you want to kind of shortcut that life cycle process and insert now billions of dollars worth of secure by design apparatus to take the place of those that weren't. We're looking at that across critical infrastructure sectors, and it's a ginormous problem. I don't know if you pay attention. I pay attention to news like the kinds of components that all of our electricity producers use in their generation plants. We think that there may be, and there's good reason to think there may be, device issues just like the TVs that we were talking about earlier today, embedded however many years ago and still there. And so legacy systems, the cost of infrastructure, I mean, there's a lot of reasons why we are where we're at, but we really need to do better. And secure by design, I think, is one step in the right direction. But so is mandated reporting. We have no idea some of the activities that are going on out there, and if we had a better picture of it, I think we'd be even more concerned. States like here, we're already contemplating following the DHS lead and mandating reporting because we're not getting the volunteerism that would paint the picture that would help us understand where the resources really should be driven. So those are all challenges, and yeah, we're late. We're really late.
So you pick up on something real quick, Jimmy. I just want to follow up on, and you hit it. So first of all, White House put out a big warning last year about cranes, about Chinese cranes. And the answer is not to replace cranes, it's just to get rid of the kill switch on the cranes. I mean, it's not like we don't put kill switches on things. I mean, we put them in tractors for Christ's sake that we send to Ukraine. So the fact we're having a national dilemma about kill switches, that doesn't make any sense to me. We just go ahead and take them out, remove them, and the crane's perfectly operable. But the bigger issue here is when I started to talk about defense critical infrastructure when I was at the Pentagon, every lawyer that I could find would say, you can't do any of that because it's owned by the private sector. I don't understand that, and I'm going to change it because of the fact that our whole military is built around protecting our citizens and our infrastructure that's owned by the private sector. So why should we be prohibited because of Title 10 versus Title 50? I was on the committee when we stood up Cybercom. We could not include the mission for the defense of critical infrastructure because it was owned by the private sector. So we're going to have to cross that. It is time. We are seeing attacks on our infrastructure. We have to now take down the barriers between Title 50 and Title 32 and Title 10 and allow our national security resources to be deployed forward into our critical infrastructure, actively collaborating, not worried about liability, not worried about the fact that somehow we're going to create a problem for that private infrastructure owner, but to deploy them smartly where we can ultimately actively defend them virtually without necessarily creating a problem. So we do need to fix that problem quickly.
So I see three very clear areas where it got us the situation that we are in right now. The first is speed. The speed at which technology is developed and the speed at which technology is adopted, right? So developed, I think you guys all understand, like as things progress, and we're seeing cooler things on the market every day that we will want. So we're going to line up for Black Friday. The second is the speed of adoption. COVID took everybody by surprise, and who else did? I was so bored during COVID, I bought every single fitness equipment and subscription-based like streaming the service out there on the face of the planet. I'm pretty sure everyone in this room is probably accurate. That's a statement for you all too. So the speed at which adoption really accelerated, and there wasn't time for a lot of these cybersecurity protocols to get adopted. The second is psychological. I think in general, and Americans in Western culture have a hard time with this. We do not like short-term pain, even if it means long-term gain. The reason why Ozempic exists is because we don't want to learn to eat healthy. And if it's gonna cost us time and energy, but there's an easy button, that's what we wanna do. So if cyber is going to take a long time to ensure that we're resilient and it's designed, secure by design, there's less of an incentive for us to do that. It's a psychological thing in my perspective. The last is accountability. Samsung, Sony, none of these manufacturers are held accountable for having devices that are secure, right? They don't care. There's no extra money in it if it's not, if it is or it isn't secure. In fact, there's probably, I'm not going to speculate, but I'm going to speculate, like what would nation states give them in terms of production kickbacks? I don't know. Like I said, I should really consider a job in fraud as a service. Anyways, please go ahead.
Yeah, we definitely want questions. I know there were some questions in the back too, so just want to step up to the microphone here real quick. We'll knock those down. And believe it or not, we're already at 10:45, so we're going to knock out our answers and questions here pretty quickly so we can give most folks a chance to answer. Go ahead, Jack.
All right, so Lucian, you definitely scared the crap out of me and probably everyone else, but it makes me think, and some of the answers you guys have already given, what do we do? How do we fix this situation? And thinking, can we start looking at our kinetic friends that are getting lots of money? And in fact, I was in a digital twin discussion with the XM30, haven't even started bending metal, and they're saying we've got to keep track of what chips are going into the different boards because that might be infiltrated. Well, that's already done. They're thinking about it. Let me take some of their money, reposition it, and Pat, to your point, which I was going to bring up, why don't we just potentially play the card that crushed the Pinto and crushed the Corvair? Do you have a Sharp X blah 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 TV? The Chinese can watch you in your bedroom. Thanks. Now I got to take the TV out. But
and the cameras.
But all of those different things. How do we do it? It sounds like, I know you could go on, all of you, but it sounds like we have policy. We have. The first thing that comes to my mind is we have to start educating the public. Yeah, this is scary, but you know what's really scary? Waking up and not having power and not having water and not knowing why.
Yep. All right. So let me hit that real quick, and then I'll offer it to my colleagues. So obviously, this is what I've been living and dreaming for the past 7 years. That's why I run a nonprofit. We need industry standards. We need really tangible industry standards, not NIST, because anybody's tried to do NIST frameworks and RMF. It is like a Sears catalog. You don't actually get the tangible solutions. So we definitely need to come up with by sector, whatever sector it is, firm standards. CMMC is a crapshoot. I'm sorry, anybody here is a CMMC advocate. That's not going to get us compliance. All right, and if we're chasing compliance, we're not doing the right thing because the threat's evolving by the month. All right. So we need to look at secure by design, Jimmy brought it up, for every OT device. Not software, but also how that software is integrated into a system, how that system is integrated into a F-35 or a building or a car. I mean, think about how many microchips are on a modern car today, 2,500 to 3,000 microchips. Your car can get bricked in a matter of seconds. Is there a dashboard light that says, hey, pull over, someone's screwing with your data? They could create an unsafe condition. Doesn't exist, right? I mean, why are we not thinking about this? Because what Kat said is moving so fast, we're not doing this. So we need good minds at senior levels. You know, there is no cybersecurity trade association that's putting this stuff out. Solarium tried, but it's, you know, and it got maybe halfway down the road. But we do need national thought leadership on secure by design for OT and secure for public safety. We need to start talking about what I talk about in my nonprofit, public cyber safety, not cybersecurity, because there's a huge difference between the two. When you start talking security, it's an optional investment. When you start talking cyber safety in that TV or cyber safety in our car, now it becomes a mandatory requirement to protect human life. So we've got to change the culture a little bit and start asking ourselves and asking those around us, do we have requirements in place for that cyber safety for that next TV we buy? Are there requirements in place for the next program we're putting in place to ensure cyber safety? So those are the types of cultural changes that we need to make quickly. Cybersecurity is IT, cyber safety is OT. We need to figure that out.
And I think I want to pair Lucian's kind of national strategic vision with where we're thinking here in Hawaii. And it's not much different, although I would say that rather than embed national support, I need to empower my critical infrastructure entities to be the defenders that they have become, however involuntarily. And I think part of that is understanding the resource requirements and working with our local utility commissions, because that's where the money comes from for them. If I can't move national authorities and national resources so we get federal grants at the state level, I can move our utility commission to understand the security risks they're levying on our people at a minimum in our state. And so empowering our critical infrastructure entities, and that's by working with them on a daily basis and engaging with them, understanding their challenges, what their solutions need to look like, because all of those entities are different. A power producer is not the same as a water purifier. And so I think those are things at a state level we can do to help meet the national security mechanism as it grinds and hopefully finds solutions. But we can't wait for the national solution. I know I can't wait for the national solution. We need solutions now here in Hawaii. And those are the kinds of things that we're looking at doing so that we can really make some traction happen and then maybe meet the national solutions when they do come trickling down all the way to the business.
All right, Cyber Warrior,
Yeah.
you're up.
Good morning, my name is Sarn Cole. So the question I have, you guys kind of touched a little bit on it earlier, but why is it that something as important as the cyber realm seems to almost be ignored or not taken seriously in our government when it's the main attack vector for China, Russia, and Iran?
It's a billion-dollar question. You go first.
All right. I guess spent a lot of time on this.
He's
Fantastic
getting wound
question.
up, yeah, Molly, just buckle up.
All right, so first of all, we are starting to see, and leave it on politics. If you go to one of the candidates actually has on their platform, they put out protection of critical infrastructure from cyber attacks. So you're starting to see national leaders address this more holistically. There is really a lack of intelligence at senior government levels on the OT threat. It's starting to emerge. Right now, at least I've heard CISA is absolutely immersed at the White House level on looking at the public safety aspect, but it's only been recently. So Volt Typhoon and some of the OT attacks we've had recently was a wake-up call. Not quite a cyber Pearl Harbor or a cyber 9/11, but close enough where we're starting to see people focus on OT. It took us too long, but we are going to see more policies and programs coming out in the next 6 months out of CISA, out of DoD, and ultimately focused on OT protections. My concern is that military leaders don't understand both the potent power of cyber offensive, as well as cyber defensive. More importantly, cyber O. I'm positive, as I've seen it, Eventually, it's gonna be the preferred method of delivery of kinetic effect, more so than gunpowder or anything else. So I think we are starting to see it as the methods evolve, where we start really focusing on what it can do to allow us to prevail. And more importantly, adversaries using it against us. I mean, that's clearly a deterrence mechanism for them right now. They're employing it against us. So, and unfortunately, we don't have a MAD construct, mutually assured destruction, because we are the most technologically advanced society in the world. So we have much greater vulnerability than any nation in the world from a cyber attack. So to answer your question directly, why hasn't it been paid attention to? I'm not sure it was on the radar screen. More importantly, it's not a really sexy program that costs $5 million. But I think that's changing very quickly here in the last 6 months to a year.
So I think we're getting close. Maybe what we can do is wrap up with final thoughts. Jimmy, you want to go first?
Go right ahead.
Okay.
All right.
I would say, let's focus on the future, right? How do we fix this? Singapore is actually doing something really interesting. They're giving a lot of their OT devices almost like Energy Star ratings, but for security. So security rating 5 versus security rating 1. And they're using as a force function to get consumers and manufacturers to care about this. So it's actually quite brilliant. It's somewhat entrapment if you think about it, which that's I kind of love. So if you're Samsung and you're like, yeah, I don't want to play your stupid sticker game, your 5-star rating or whatever, that's fine, no worries, I won't give you any stickers. In fact, you can have my 1 sticker for free, 1-star sticker. Just go ahead and take this 1-star sticker. But you know what, Sony is going to do this, and they're going to get a 4-star sticker. And let's just see what people say when they're buying their TVs, right? Well, I'm a college student, but I could probably still afford a 2-star sticker than a 1-star sticker. I'm going to go with that. So we're forcing, without any use of policy or regulation, a consumer-driven mandate for higher cybersecurity standards by just using stickers and stars, as if we were elementary school kids. It's a pretty great strategy, right? So I do not think the answer is to move all of our manufacturing out of China. We'll never be able to do that. In fact, if anybody is around early enough and they saw how Huawei got to where they are, they just went to the original IP data from Nortel Networks ages ago, right? So it doesn't matter where the manufacturing or the IP is coming from, it's gonna get stolen. So that's not the answer. The answer is have the consumers, our cumulative purchasing power, drive the requirements for higher cybersecurity requirements, and hopefully that extends to the DoD too. Like, I didn't get into this. There's a huge problem right now where China is utilizing our own procurement processes against us. All right, that's my piece.
Okay, so first of all, real quick, we didn't rehearse this, but that's exactly what my nonprofit has done. We've created a very basic cyber bronze, cyber gold, only for assessing facilities. And yes, the U.S. government is working on a consumer product labeling authority for cyber safety, cybersecurity, although it's language. So final comments, please. Difference between cyber safety and cyber security. We have to leave this room and start asking about OT as a public safety issue. And that drives a completely different response mechanism when it comes to having to spend money to mitigate safety risk, right? That's number one. Number two, any CISO or CIO that's in the room, you need to know the OT that's on your network. I guarantee you, I have not yet found a CISO or CIO that is completely sure they know all the devices, not the network, the devices that are attached to the network. So you've got to start asking, what about the OT? Third, you've got to ask yourself, what do we have in place when we buy the next system for the military? Whether it be a TV, whether it be a Roomba, whether it be anything, what is the threat, and am I willing to live with that risk? But believe it or not, a Roomba can be turned into a listening device. A thermostat can be turned into a listening device. Anything that's got a chip in it can be manipulated. When you turn your phone off, it's not off. It's transmitting and it's receiving. All right? So we have to ask ourselves, what risk do we want to take on? Do we understand what the risks are with the OT that's around us? And how do we have a way to mitigate that risk?
And for me, I'll be brief because time's up. So what I would say, at least the perspective we have, is we want to drive things locally, right? We want to get to the very lowest level here to make sure that we're doing the right things that are going to matter. And I mentioned it before, we can't wait for national policy to come to us. We see what the challenges are, and we're going to go to meet the challenge, and we're going to do it in partnership and collaboration with all those that will come with us. That's our critical infrastructure entities, our military counterparts, anyone who wants to be in this conversation and row in this canoe, welcome aboard.
Thank you.